Once again, from the studios of UNO Television on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Great question. Do you know the answer? Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, National Healthcare Decisions Day. Joining us to talk more about it are Helen Chappell, an assistant professor in the Center for Health Policy and Ethics at Creighton University, Dr. Lisa Manser. Dr. Manser specializes in palliative and pulmonary medicine at Bryan Health in Lincoln, and Thomas Malicki, an attorney. He is a partner at Abrams, Kaslow, and Kassman in Omaha. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You bet. Dr. Chappell, we're going to start with you. How do you define a life-changing event?
Whoa. Well, it's something unwelcome that is going to come to anyone, all of us. And it's unpredictable. It may be sudden or it may crop up over time, but it does change your life. It does change the way you live and the way you plan for the future.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, paint a picture of the typical environment that surrounds a life-changing event.
Absolutely, and I think, Kathy, to answer that question, when we talk to our patients face to face, most of them say, I definitely do not want to die in the hospital. And yet, in 2010 alone, 715,000 people in the United States died at U.S. hospitals. And of those individuals, 27% of them were 85 and older, and 27% were between 75 and 84. Now, as a physician, especially as I talk to my patients, what you see in a lot of these circumstances is that individual who's had this progressive decline, perhaps multiple hospitalizations, and accruing of multiple medical problems, but yet really no discussion about where they are in the medical path of life, or a discussion of the path ahead and the options there. So, you know, that is the real typical picture that we see, and the main reason why I have really worked from critical care to work in palliative care to try to help individuals think about things before they happen.
Yeah, and this might seem pretty obvious to you, but what does all that mean in terms of communication when you get into a scenario?
Absolutely,
like
and we know this both clinically and statistically. You know, if we wait for the wheels to fall off, honestly, that is tremendous stress on the family. And from my standpoint, much more important for the patient because they lose their voice. They may not be decisional. They may not be able to participate in those discussions. Our patients have a very firm sense in what's important to them. So that piece of communication needs to start early on in a perhaps terminal illness. It needs to start early on as we age and begin accruing those medical problems. It needs to happen repeatedly and, you know, with empathy and a point of gentleness, but it needs to happen with our families, our patients, and our physicians all together.
Yeah, I would imagine that's very difficult for you to witness outcomes with scenarios that have not been set up properly, right?
Absolutely, because, you know, when I sit down and have conversations with my patients, and the beautiful thing about us talking about this more and more is that patients actually come to me in my pulmonary practice and say, hey, can I bring my family to have these discussions ahead of time? I really want my voice heard. And the three things, without question, that all of our patients ask for is, number one, I'm the boss, I'm in charge. They really do want to have that opportunity to let their family know, to let their physicians know what's important to them and what they do and don't want. Secondly, they are very clear, I do not want suffering. They do not want to go through pain or other symptoms that cause them distress. And the last thing without question, because it's new territory for everybody, is that they really want us as physicians to help their family understand the path ahead, what they're going through, and what to expect.
So Dr. Chappell, enter National Healthcare Decisions Day.
Sure.
7th annual coming up, correct?
Yes, it is.
So what
Yes, it
is that exactly?
National Healthcare Decisions Day draws attention to the fact that if we talk about these things ahead of time, then we set up, it's sort of a rehearsal for the chaos to come, even though we may not know how that's going to actually unfold. It's helpful to recognize that such a thing is going to happen for each of us and to talk about it ahead of time. Decisions are helpful, but even the conversation has to happen, needs to happen. And that alone, even without firm decisions, can make a big difference in how smoothly things go when the chaos hits.
You know, that's much easier said than done, Lisa, because few of us want to even admit that we're aging, right? Let alone that we're going to die, that
Yes.
something is going to happen and that's going to occur as a result.
It's
so
true.
What's reassuring for folks to know here?
Well, the thing that I've learned in our 5 years of palliative practice as we talk to our patients, you know, if we wait to that disaster point at the hospital, those conversations are exceptionally difficult. However, when I'm asked to come out and talk to groups of individuals or speak at churches where people can sit down and actually have this opportunity to ask these thoughtful questions, those discussions are far more productive, whether it's in my practice or whether I'm out and about, or even if I get stopped at the grocery store and somebody shares their story about something that's going on with a family member. So the discussions can be extremely difficult, but what the literature definitely says and what I have experienced is the sooner we have those discussions and allow our patients and families to really have control of the questioning and really the information seeking part, it makes those discussions when things happen at the hospital so much easier.
So, Dr. Chappell, the million-dollar question then for our viewers is, how do we actually get that conversation going? And I want to just add to that, there are some families who don't communicate anyway, right? Now we bring this into the mix and it becomes that much more complicated. So provide us with a few tips on how to break the ice there.
Well, it's important to think about what you want to say first. It's helpful to go, the Conversations Project is a website that you can go to that helps with starting the conversation, helping to know how to broach the topic. You can even use a TV show, say, or a scenario that comes along that people are talking about out of the paper, out of the news, to say, hey, that reminds me, I've been wondering, you know, I've been thinking about this and wondering what is it that you might want? What are some of your goals of care? So just tell you a story. I've been in this field a long time, and I happened to ask, finally, I thought, well, I better ask my husband what he wants. And he said to me, I don't know, I guess if I can't go outside. And I thought, well, that's not a lot of information, but it's something, it tells me something about what is important to him about the quality of his life. So that's maybe not the very best way to go about it, but for me it worked and gave me some information so that there are ways to, people can talk about their goals that may not necessarily connect to, well, if I'm dying or if I don't want to be a vegetable, that sort of thing. They can just talk about their goals, and those goals are going to change as your life circumstances change and as your health changes. So those conversations need to be, as Lisa said, they need to recur. They need to be happening more based on these changing events in your life.
One of the things that I often hear is we don't know what we don't know.
Oh,
right?
that's absolutely true.
So when you're saying sit down and think about what you want in terms of care, the healthcare system is extremely complicated, right? People are trying to grasp long-term care and the difference between independent living and assisted living and nursing home and palliative care. That's a pretty new, you know, it's been around for a while, but people are just starting, right, to understand that a little bit more. So when I'm sitting at the table and I'm just starting to jot down my goals and then I'm going to be calling folks together, what are things to think about just to get my list going?
it's really important to think about not only what you want, but who you want to speak for you. Who would be a trusted person that you might know that wouldn't fall apart in a crisis, and that can grasp information that's a lot of new information that's being given to them and be able to react in a reasonable way, so that even though, because what you say you want, because that black box of acute care is unknowable, basically, even to those of us who've practiced in it, it's the full extent of it is unknowable. You're going to have someone who's able to make decisions based on the current facts, which you may not be able to anticipate. So you need to pick the right person. So that's an important piece of this advanced care planning and National Healthcare Decisions Day.
Okay, so I have my list, and now I'm thinking about who I want around the table.
Mm-hmm.
People you know you absolutely should have, and maybe people you really shouldn't have, at least at that initial meeting. Any thoughts on that?
Well, you would know yourself the best who might react well. I've certainly heard about people who say, I brought it up and my parents didn't want to even, they just wouldn't go there. And they're sort of despairing over that. And it's really not that bad. You've planted a seed, you've shown them that you're concerned, and that may turn into something later on. There have been suggestions of talking about it at Thanksgiving, talking turkey, as you might say, because there's not a lot of other really heavy meaning oftentimes around Thanksgiving, and people are gathered. It's an opportunity. So there are lots of kinds of ways to think about this, and ways to think about the opportunity to speak and to whom, and what the content of that conversation might be. And you're not going to get it right, probably, the first time, maybe even the second time. But the fact that you even can broach the topic, if you can even bring it up, even in your own head, and stay with that topic for a while, then talk about it with others, that's an enormous accomplishment, just enormous.
Trial and error. Lisa, family dynamics. When I say that to you, and we're listening to Dr. Chappell talk about getting people around the table, I haven't met a family yet who doesn't have some dynamics,
Absolutely.
good or bad or indifferent.
Yes.
So when we're having that conversation and we're working our way through, and we have someone who's, I'll go to both sides, supportive, maybe somebody not so much. How do we handle that?
Right. And you know, even as I love exactly what Dr. Chappell has said. I mean, even with my 4 kids, I see 4 completely different ways of handling my end-of-life situation. So that's normal. We first have to accept that that's normal for a family. So, you know, it is a process, that it's a group process. And just like Dr. Chappell said, the Conversation Project has some excellent questions. And we frequently pass out this packet of very neat, non-offensive questions for families to start working on, not to get done in a single day, but it initiates those questions to start the conversation. With regards to handling the family, you understand there's going to be different perspectives, different biases, and just accept that piece as we go along. There's some degree of negotiation, but I think as we always return to the fact that we're doing things that are for and not to the patient, and also making sure that we hopefully involving the patient, but always following the directive of the patient in the spirit of who they are and what their definition is with regards to quality of life. And I think as long as you're redirecting the entire family in that direction, you can definitely move everybody to the proper decisions.
Okay. Tom, one thing to talk about this particular issue, right? And let's just assume that the family has come together and we've put some wishes down and people have heard. Now we want to do something about that, and we're talking specifically here about legal documents,
Correct.
right? So first of all, if you could just define an adult in Nebraska.
Sure, an adult in Nebraska would be someone who's 19 years of age or older. They would be able to sign documents that would be legally binding upon them.
Okay, so when we're talking legal documents, especially pertaining to this topic, give us first the umbrella and then talk more specifics here.
Sure, I mean, the subject you're talking about encompasses a piece of overall estate planning where you're not only making decisions for end of life, but you're also planning for distribution of assets, which would include a will, a trust, more so what we're talking about today are the things that are happening while you're still alive. And those are things that need to have decisions made when you're not able to do so, because otherwise the doctors would just speak with the patient. So you need to have financial powers of attorney to have people handle your assets, but the two main things for this topic would be a living will and also a healthcare power of attorney. And those are the operative documents that would be used in this situation.
Very important documents, yet the majority of people either don't have them or don't have them up to date. Why, Tom?
Because, as the doctors have pointed out, they don't want to deal with and think through a lot of those decisions and have those discussions with their families. When they think of estate planning, they think of a will. They don't think of not being able to make decisions for themselves, and it's difficult to have some of those conversations because of the nature of the topic, so they just put it off.
Yeah, and let's talk about the importance really, Lisa, about this. So I think there's an assumption that if I'm a spouse, I can go into a hospital, I can go into a crisis situation and speak on behalf of my loved one. What happens when we don't have our ducks in a row in terms of legal documents when we get into a situation like that?
Right. Well, as a general rule, immediate family are able to help us make those decisions based on previous conversations and previous directives. It is so much better, again, to have had the conversation, the documents, and an actual appointed power of attorney or even powers of attorney. Some families will appoint the spouse perhaps and a couple of the kids so that it's a joint and a comfortable, you're not out there on your own. So in those situations it becomes a lot more difficult because especially if we don't know the patient ahead of time and haven't had the opportunity as physicians to have those conversations, sometimes you definitely are left trying to figure out what is it that the patient themselves would have directed in that situation.
Good, which makes the language, Tom, so important. Let's talk about verbiage in a legal document because, gone are the days where it's good enough just to have a piece of paper. Why is the verbiage so important?
The verbiage is important because the document is speaking for you. You are not in a position where you're able to speak for yourself or to give instructions, and this document is telling someone to act on your behalf and explaining to them what you do or do not want to have happen with respect to procedures and those types of things. So you need to be very specific in the document as best as you can so that people will understand what you want and there won't be any difficulties in interpreting what exactly it is. So you want to try to be as precise as you can be, knowing that the medical field is somewhat imprecise and you will never know everything, but the more you can put out there the better because it's your instructions in terms of how you want to be dealt with.
Now, Dr. Chappell spoke to this earlier, but it's critical that you have the right representative. I'm sure you get people coming into your law firm quite a bit saying, well, I kind of know what I want to do, but I'm not really sure who I should have. And I think there's an assumption sometimes that a family member's best, but I loved what you said earlier, and it's so important to stress that you can have a great relationship with your daughter, but in a crisis situation, she may not be the best person to be representing you. So when you're going down that list of things with the family and they're asking you, gosh, Tom, who should I pick? What criteria are you giving them?
There's a couple of main criteria. One is that the person is actually going to be available and able to make those decisions and easy to get a hold of and actually be there. And the main variable is that they're willing to act. A lot of times they will have discussions, they will just pick the oldest child, they will pick the spouse, and that person is great, but they're not comfortable taking the steps that need to be made in order to implement these things. So you have to look at it and decide who is going to be around, and then also, which is the most important thing, to make sure that they will act because you're not going to be able to do it and you're relying upon them to do what you've instructed.
Right, and if you have two people acting as your representatives, the ampersand, so to speak, you want to make sure that those two individuals get along and, to your point, that they're readily available. Talk about that, one representative versus two, or maybe even more than that, what you could run into there.
Well, the main things when you have more than one is they can have differing viewpoints on something, and then there's nothing that happens with the differing viewpoint. So with the drafting of the document, there's certain ways you can try to get through that situation, but whenever you have more than one person, they need to be in agreement, and sometimes based upon the decisions that need to be made, you don't have time to go have a discussion and spend a couple hours trying to hash it out. You need to decide now. So the difficulties when you name more than one is there may be a situation where no decision is made. So you just need to think that through. It's easy to do and it's possible to have to, but there are some difficulties with it at times.
And alternates, talk a little bit about those.
Alternates are very important too, because the people you name, if you're signing documents when you're relatively young, the people that you name are young, but they may age. They may not be able to continue to serve. They may move out of town. They may have their own health issues themselves, so you want to make sure that you have at least one, possibly more than one, person named after each other so that they then can take the place of the other, so that the document has someone to implement it, which is the main point. You have the document, but if the people that are named aren't there anymore or can't serve, the document doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, and Dr. Chappell, I did want to ask you specifically about those situations. Important to get them updated, but it's heartbreaking when you meet a couple and let's say dementia has been brought into the picture, right? And we know that there's going to be a progression there. Sitting down and visiting with that couple about, I can appreciate that you still want your spouse in that role, but you understand that given time and the prognosis, that's not going to be possible. Talk a little bit about change in health circumstance, especially where you have spouses that are involved.
Well, these decisions need to be revisited on a regular basis, really. And as I say, having the conversation itself, whether or not documents are perfectly executed or whatever, having the conversation itself is a very, very important thing to have done. Now, if you're thinking about asking a spouse to be the decision maker and you think the spouse is going downhill, then you might ask a friend to be their backup. Not necessarily legally, but there to sort of support them and help listen to the information, help process it for that person who might be compromised. May be compromised for lots of reasons in that moment as well, even if they don't have dementia. So
Right.
it's helpful to have some backup ideas. You're never going to be able to take care of everything because we can't predict the future. It's annoying, but we really can't. And these are chaotic times. So you do the best you can. You do the best you can. And just that action makes things run more smoothly than if you had done nothing.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, I want to talk, because of the particular day, about end of life a little bit here in our final minutes of the program. Palliative care, for those people who've heard of it, but maybe don't know how it's defined or how it's different from hospice care. Could you educate us a little bit on that?
It's a new word, and it's out there. Some people think supportive would be an easier word to pronounce and perhaps less offensive. The word actually means to surround or to hug. And being the daughter of a physician, medicine has changed hugely in my 50 years of life. And so by definition, I think the practical way to look at palliative care is an individual's last 2 years of life. And in those circumstances, we actually have pretty good ways to predict that based on physical circumstance and medical burden. Now, unfortunately, when patients are referred to palliative care, they usually have less than 6 months of life remaining. Now, hospice is the final 6 months of palliative care. So if two physicians feel that a particular patient has enough medical burden that they're anticipating less than 6 months, that's the process of hospice care, that path of care, which is a very personalized and wonderful path of care. With palliative care, the real focus is making sure that we're addressing goals, addressing expectations, and making sure that dignity and comfort and quality are really the most important things, because we know cure is not possible.
Right. And how is palliative care covered?
It's just like any other specialty, and honestly, in this day and age, when there's one palliative care certified physician for 20,000 patients, you know that that's not a practical process. So palliative care can be done by any physician. It's really having that opportunity to sit down and look at where we are on our medical path of life and what to expect in the future, and make decisions based on what the patient and the family direct.
And like hospice care, palliative care can be performed wherever an individual calls home.
Absolutely.
So that can be done wherever you are at any given time. Now, because this is a sensitive topic for people, and we have viewers watching, when would they know to pick up, what steps would they take if they're thinking that palliative care may be something for their loved one?
Absolutely. And you know, we have some interesting measures out there that are kind of what I call red flags. So, you know, obviously sometimes you have the sudden catastrophic medical event. And in that circumstance, palliative care is very helpful with regards to sitting down with families, helping them understand the circumstance and the options ahead. In the typical circumstances, the individual has several medical issues going on. And so if they begin to have the red flags of weight loss, falls, and multiple hospitalizations, so if we begin to have a hospitalization a month or even a hospitalization every couple of months, it's time to think about palliative care. Those are usually the kick-out points. You know, try to do what we can to reverse those circumstances, but we know even with the putting the thumb in the dike, as I say, you know, that will only be temporary. So it's still a good time with those three things, weight loss, falls, and multiple hospitalizations, to really start thinking about the palliative path of care.
Yeah, and benefits, just briefly recap the benefits of this type of care, because I think people often liken palliative and hospice to death.
Right.
It's really about enhancing quality of life.
Indeed. It's like we tell our patients, palliative care or hospice, it's really about taking on the day with intention and commitment to have the best quality of life we can, given the medical circumstance. So you're exactly right, Kathy. People say, well, that's giving up. And when in fact the real battle is acceptance. Once we hit that point of acceptance, by golly, not only statistically but clinically, as we follow that path of care that adds to quality, comfort, faith, and family, those individuals not only live better, they live a little bit longer, and their spouses live better. So the main thing I always like to say, it's not a point of giving up, it's a point of accepting and taking on life with a commitment.
There's work to be done. There's work to be done at the end of our lives, and we need support to do it. Palliative care and hospice give us that support, and we need to take that on. It's a new phase of life, and the acceptance is a big piece of that, and then we move forward using hospice and palliative care to help us do the work that needs to be done at the end of our days.
And even though it's not a phase like birth and graduation and weddings and all those amazing things we think about, that final phase of life is just as important to our patients and our families as any other phase of life. It's just one of those we don't necessarily sit around and plan on and talk about openly.
Okay, so for folks who want to know more about this topic, we're going to go ahead and put a graphic up now so that they can log on, learn some more. We've been talking about National Healthcare Decisions Day today. It is Wednesday, April 16th. For more information, you can log on to NHDD.org. If you've done nothing else after this program, just get the conversation going. Folks, thank you so much for being here, sharing your time and expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy.
You bet.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or email us at considerthis@tvmail.unomaha.edu.